Welcome back to the channel. So we have the frame. As I had said in another video, it's Prismatic Powders Illusion Cinnamon. I started doing some assembly of some minor pieces. I had some company over the day I was working on it, couldn't do any filming. Very simple. Put the bumper on, some rubber pieces, mounts for shrouds. I believe a lot of the early frames did not have a tab in place for your radiator shrouds, so you had to use these brackets. Got the pedals in place, rear brake pedal that is installed, greased with new seals, engine skid. Got some of the bolts in place. Now I highly recommend anybody that's doing this where you're powder coating a frame and then reassembling, do plan on having some taps, specifically an M8 by 1.25, an M10 by 1.25. That will definitely make your life a lot easier. It's definitely well worth it to run a tap through a lot of these holes, even though as you can see, like my powder coating guy did tape off most of these holes and mark them off, but you still get material in them from blasting and other debris that gets in there. It just makes it so much easier just to run a tap through the holes first and then go ahead and run your bolts in. So what I am going to do today, I want to get my steering stem installed, and then I want to get my rear swing arm installed and rear suspension. I've already put the new bearing in for the steering stem. Put it in the freezer, and then it just tapped right in with a socket just small enough to fit inside of there. Tapped it right into place, seats in place. I couldn't go any further because I was waiting on, I had bought a steering stem rebuild kit, which includes the bearing and the seals and new cotter pin. But what it doesn't include is the clip, the circlip that locks that bearing into place. So we have to go ahead and install that. Grease it, put the seals in on both sides, then we'll be able to mount our steering stem and get that installed on our frame. So when you install the bearing, once you got the bearing installed, the circlip will go on top of it, right on top of it in the hole. Just got to grab myself a set of ring pliers, put that in, snap ring pliers, and then you have your seals. You have a larger one and a smaller one. The larger one is up top, smaller one is on the bottom. Then once you put your steering stem in, there is going to be this collar that's going to squeeze in there, basically, and then your lock nut and cotter pin on the bottom of the steering stem. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to get some grease on these, fill the backs of these with grease, get these seals put in place. Got to get that circlip put in place, and then we have our hardware, our mount for the upper part of the upper mount for the steering stem, and obviously a new bushing for that too. Okay, so I installed the bearing the other day. Like I said, I put that in the freezer first. That just makes it shrink down a little bit, and then it makes it real easy to tap it right in place. I got the circlip here with snap ring pliers. I'm going to attempt to do this one-handed and get this in there. This is a Honda part number. Excuse me a second here. Let me get this in place. Okay, try number 2 here. All right, drop that right in. And then once you get that down in there, just make sure it's completely set down. Okay, snap rings in place, and that just locks the bearing into place. Now I'm going to get the seals packed so we can get them installed, and then we'll be able to set the steering stem in place. All right, got the seals all packed with grease. Now we're going to come back over here to set these into place. I'm going to go ahead and set this right in here. Obviously the spring side is going to go down. And I'm probably gonna have to grab a socket and just tap that in. Let me get a socket that fits that. Okay, got our seal in place. An 1.16" socket fits in there perfect, taps it right down. I took our skid plate off that I had loosely fastened into place. Going to put the lower seal in, then we'll be able to go ahead and once that's in, then we'll be able to set the steering stem into place. Okay, I flipped the frame over, got the underside seal in place. That taps right down. A 15/16 impact socket works perfect. Taps it right down in there. Now we'll be able to put it in, put our steering stem in, and get everything bolted into place. Okay, got the frame upright. Put a little extra grease in there in the inside of the bearing, basically between the bearing and the seal on both sides. Waterproof red grease. And we're going to take our steering shaft and slide that into place. And there we go. Our steering shaft is in place. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put our mount in for up top here with the rubber bushing. The rubber bushing that goes in here, I'm going to go ahead and wrap that with, or basically coat that with some silicone lubricant, just so that there's a little bit of lube for where this spins. Okay, so got that bushing, got it greased with just some super lube synthetic grease. It's clear, which is nice, so you don't see it. Now we'll get the bracket in place that wraps around that and then bolts right into the frame. Here's the bracket for our frame. Okay, clearly says out and in. So this is the part that goes against the frame. This is the part that's on the outside. There's a groove here that captures there's a rubber lip or on the bushing, and then that'll lock that into place. All right, so we got the mounting block in place. Just gonna get the rest of the bolts in here. Put a little anti-seize on them as well, just to make sure that, not that I anticipate having to take this apart anytime soon, but I'm up here in the Northeast. Things don't last long if you don't. So I'm going to go ahead and get these tightened down, and then we'll get ready to put the lock nut and the cotter pin on the bottom of the steering stem. Okay, I got the bolts most of the way in. I left them just a little loose because as we tighten up the nut on the bottom here, I want the steering shaft to be able to pull down if it needed. So first thing you got to do is there's this spacer bushing that's going to go over the shaft, and it's going to push up into the seal between the, it's going to work its way in between the shaft and the seal. Okay, so once you get that bushing up in there, okay, you just got to make sure that it seats completely up into the seal. Then the next step is to put the nut on, which is a 22 millimeter nut. And that will thread right up into there. And then we're going to go ahead and snug that up. You don't have to kill it. And make sure that your steering stem turns nice and free, moves nice and smooth. And then you'll put the cotter pin in last. I'm going to go ahead and get that bent back into place. All right, Cotter pin is in place. I did trim the length of the cotter pin. The cotter pin they give you is really long. You don't necessarily need all that length. Made it easier to fold it back without scratching your frame. Nothing's going to interfere. And then did the final tightening on our upper bolts. Steering stem moves nice and smooth, nice and solid, side to side, as it should. All right, gonna put my front skid plate back on, and then we're gonna move on to the rear swing arm. All right, we're gonna go ahead and work on installing our swing arm, getting the swing arm into place. We have our swing arm bolt, we have all of our new bushings and caps and spacers in the end of our swing arm. And then we have our rear engine mount, and just so you're aware, there is a mark on there, so that's going to go up. So that's going to go into that position when it's in on the swing arm. So I'm going to go ahead and get into position and get that all slid into place. Okay, so it's not difficult to get the swing arm in place. It does fit into place. Where it gets difficult is when you're trying to slide the bolt through, hold the mount into place, and then still get it to line up, and you're not trying to not knock these caps off. So I have the swing arm bolt in on this side, and then I took another bolt just to stick it in through, just to keep that right side lined up. Now I can focus on getting the mount in its correct position in between those caps, and then tap the pivot bolt through. All right, bolt is in place. Just so you know, this is a very tight fit in here. Trying to push it in by hand, not working. Took the bolts out, used a rubber mallet. Start with the thinner ends because these taper in just a slight bit, and then drive it down in between these two caps. Then you get it lined up, and then you can drive the bolt right through. And but obviously it's made to be a very tight fit. So that's in there. Now I'm going to go ahead. I just got to look up the torque spec. I believe it's, I think it's like 70 to 80 foot-pounds. Then we're going to go ahead and torque the swing arm bolt. And we'll be able to put our bolts right back in here. And then we can install our rear shock and shock linkage. Okay, so torque spec is 51 to 80 foot-pounds. Pretty broad range. So I torqued mine to 65 foot-pounds. It's an 18 millimeter on the bolt side, 22 millimeter on the nut side. So have that suspended in place. Now I'm going to work to get my rear shock in place and our linkage. Our shock here is an OEM shock. This is been rebuilt and modified by Schmitty Racing suspension. Evan out there actually modifies the shock to give the shock about a ½ inch of extra compression travel, which geometrically will give you about 3/4 of an inch to an extra inch of suspension travel at the axle. So we're going to go ahead and get this in place. Okay, got our front link installed. Okay, I have my swing arm skid plate on, so I'm going to have to work with that right now. Not a big deal. I could take it off if I want to, but not a big deal. You can work around it. So I still got to torque the bolt, but I'm just putting everything in loose for now. Just so you know, when you put this on, these little lobes on the bottom face down, and the grease fitting should be pointing downward to make it easier to grease the grease fitting there. I think next we're going to put our shock into place, drop that down into here, and then we'll put our dog bone link in that comes onto the end of the swing arm. Okay, got our rear shock installed. Again, I don't have the bolts torqued yet. Have our dog bone linkage in. Now I just got to line up the 3 of those in the bottom in there. Get everyone lined up, and then we'll be good to go. Be able to get the bolt through down there. It's a bigger bolt. I just got to take all the zip ties off that's holding the bearings and bearing caps in. And then we'll be able to get everything lined up. Alright, so I got a little overzealous when I put my skid plate on my swing arm there. Did have to remove it to get the lower mount bolt in. So the Upper shock bolt gets torqued to 32 to 40 pounds, and then it's 51 to 58 for the dog bone on the swing arm, the lower shock mount, and then the linkage on the frame. So we're going to go ahead and get those torqued, get a good idea of how our suspension looks here. Got to get some clamps, which will clamp the reservoir onto the side of the frame. I am going with the factory location for that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get those torqued, and then we'll be able to get our swing arm guard back on. All right, everything is torqued to spec. I was going to put my swing arm guard back on, but unfortunately my swing arm guard, when I mount it onto the bottom, it hits, and I go to mount it up on the top here, it hits my suspension linkage. I'm going to need about a 3/4 inch spacer from the swing arm in the front, so I want to double check and make sure that I was sent the correct swing arm guard before I go ahead and do that. I've never had that problem before, so I'm thinking that the guard I have is not correct. This is an 86 swing arm with 86 link, 86, 87 length linkage, and an 86, 87 shock, rear shock, so there shouldn't be any issues there. So I just got to do a little research into that. But that completes all we're going to do today. We got our steering stem installed and our rear swing arm and suspension installed. I thank you very much for joining us. If you like what we're doing here, please like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.